The string quartet played softly in the background as I smoothed the fabric of my simple navy dress, elegant, understated, intentionally forgettable, nothing that might outshine the bride. That had always been my role: stay quiet, stay small, let others take the spotlight while I put my head down and worked. My father, Robert Hartley, stood by the champagne fountain, perfectly composed in his bespoke tuxedo, surrounded by his usual orbit of business allies. At 58, he exuded the kind of authority that made people lean in. Senior vice president at Meridian Industries, the city's industrial powerhouse, he was a man who measured worth in job titles, profit margins, and legacy. From across the reception hall, I watched him animatedly recount yet another tale of quarterly domination. My mother, Patricia, poised and polished in her designer gown, stood beside him, smiling on cue while scanning the crowd for someone more important. Then came Marcus, my brother, gliding over with his champagne flute and his wife Christina draped on his arm like a designer bag. At 35, Marcus was the blueprint of Hartley's success: Harvard MBA, VP at Goldman Sachs, Fifth Avenue penthouse, and a wife whose last name could buy most of the eastern seaboard. "Alex," he said, with the smirk he reserved for those beneath him, "didn't think you'd make it. Thought your little computer hobby would keep you chained to your laptop." I took a slow sip of wine, letting the comment slide off like it always did. "Wouldn't miss Emma's big day." Christina laughed, a brittle, crystalline sound. "Marcus says you're in tech now? That's cute. Is it making any money?" Before I could respond, Victoria arrived. Sister, attorney, picture-perfect mother of two, the other crown jewel in our family's collection. "Are we talking about Alex's side project?" she asked, her tone dipped in polished condescension. "Mom said you're still in that tiny apartment downtown. Ever thought about a real job?" I'd heard this script for nearly a decade, ever since I turned down the consulting gig Dad had arranged at McKinsey and chose a doctorate in quantum computing instead. Since the day I stopped being their golden girl and started writing my own story. What they didn't know was that my side project had solved a problem scientists had struggled with for decades. What they didn't know was that I'd graced the cover of Forbes just 3 months ago. What they didn't know was that Microsoft had just offered $2.8 billion for my startup, Quantum Dynamics. But I'd learned not to reveal my hand too early. With them, success was never celebrated, it was scrutinized, repackaged, and weaponized. "I'm doing well," I said. Marcus scoffed. "Most people don't call paycheck to paycheck in a shoebox doing well, Alex." "It's Alexandra," I corrected, though I knew it wouldn't stick. Before I could say more, Dad's unmistakable voice boomed across the room. He was approaching, with a man I immediately recognized from Business Magazine, Jonathan Petton, CEO of Meridian Industries, my father's boss, the man he'd spent his career trying to impress. "Jonathan," Dad said, gripping my shoulder with feigned affection, "this is my youngest daughter, Alexandra." A beat. My disappointment. "She's in tech or something." The words landed like they always did, a quiet cut dulled only by familiarity. I smiled through it and extended my hand. "A pleasure to meet you, sir." Jonathan shook it, his gaze narrowing with recognition. He pulled out his phone and tapped rapidly, scrolling through something. "Wait a minute," he said, eyes lighting up. "Aren't you? This is you, isn't it?" He turned the screen to Dad. There I was, Forbes cover, quantum symbols glowing behind my headshot, bold headline across the top: Alexandra Hartley, the 28-year-old who solved quantum computing's greatest challenge. The air left the room. Marcus froze mid-sip. Victoria's mouth parted in shock. Christina clutched Marcus's arm like she might faint. Dad blinked at the screen, then at me, and back again. "That's not possible." Jonathan was already reading aloud. Dr. Alexandra Hartley, CEO and founder of Quantum Dynamics, developed a breakthrough quantum error correction algorithm considered the most important advancement since the microprocessor. He looked up at me, beaming. "You're the one who solved the coherence problem?" I nodded. "Among other things." Jonathan turned to Dad, eyes wide with admiration. "Robert, do you have any idea what your daughter's done? She's going to revolutionize everything: finance, medicine, AI. Every major tech company on the planet wants a piece of what she's built." Marcus finally spoke, his voice small. "You never told us." I gave him a soft smile. "You never asked." Victoria stepped forward, voice clipped. "When did this come out?" 3 weeks ago, Jonathan answered for me. "Same week Microsoft announced their acquisition." He scrolled again. "Here, $2.8 billion. Christina gasped. My mother appeared beside Dad, eyes wide with confusion. But, you still live in that little apartment. You still drive that old Honda, Victoria said, as if that fact disqualified everything else. I smiled. I live modestly by choice. The apartment is a penthouse, actually, but I prefer simplicity. And the Honda? It's reliable. I don't need luxury to validate my success. Jonathan was still scrolling through his phone, absorbed. Listen to this, he said, reading aloud. Dr. Hartley's groundbreaking research was conducted in near-total secrecy, as she preferred results over recognition. Despite receiving numerous offers from major corporations, she founded her own company, retaining full control over her innovations and how they're applied. He looked up at Dad, eyes narrowing with something like disbelief. Robert, your daughter is one of the most important scientists of our generation. Her technology could help solve climate change, reinvent medicine, and transform global communications. He paused, then delivered the line like a quiet thunderclap. And you introduced her as your disappointing daughter? The silence that followed was deafening. Wedding guests nearby began to take notice. Across the room, I caught Emma's gaze, stunned, curious, and still glowing in her wedding gown. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again. We didn't know. Because you never asked, I said calmly. You decided years ago that not following your formula meant failure. You never once considered I was building something beyond your comprehension. Marcus set down his champagne glass, his hand shaking slightly. The Mackenzie job, you turned it down, for this? I turned it down to create something of my own, something that required freedom, to think, to fail, to build without your expectations breathing down my neck. Victoria narrowed her eyes, calculating. The acquisition, you still own a majority stake? I nodded. I retained 73% when I brought in investors. At $2, $8 billion, my portion is worth about $2.04 billion. The number landed like a shockwave. Christina visibly swayed. Marcus sat down without a word. $2 billion, Dad whispered. You're worth $2 billion? On paper, yes, but that was never the point. The goal was to solve real problems, to expand what humanity can do. Jonathan turned toward Dad again, his voice sharpened. Robert, how does it feel to learn your disappointment is now one of the youngest billionaires in America? The question wasn't casual, it was surgical. I saw it hit Dad, not just the personal shame, but the professional cost. His boss had just watched him belittle the most valuable person in the room. I'm proud, Dad finally said, though it rang hollow. I tilted my head. Are you? Because just this afternoon, you told Aunt Margaret you wished I'd at least found a husband, since I clearly couldn't support myself. His flinch was visible. Victoria looked like she wanted to crawl under the nearest table. Marcus was still frozen. Alexandra, Mom's voice emerged, soft and polished, her social tone. We've always been proud, we just didn't understand. No, I said, you didn't try to understand. Every time I tried to explain, you either changed the subject or dismissed it as a waste of time. Every holiday turned into an intervention about my life choices. Jonathan, still listening, leaned in slightly. Dr. Hartley, if I may, what's next for you? The Forbes piece said the Microsoft deal includes ongoing research? I nodded. I'll be leading their new quantum research division, focusing on breakthroughs in cybersecurity, medical diagnostics, and advanced modeling. I'm also launching a foundation to fund underrepresented scientists in emerging tech fields. Brilliant, Jonathan said. He turned back to Dad. Robert, you should be immensely proud. Your daughter's work will define the next century. Before Dad could respond, the wedding coordinator called for everyone to gather for the cake cutting. Guests began to drift away, but Jonathan lingered. Dr. Hartley, he said, offering a card, I'd love to discuss potential collaborations. Meridian is looking to integrate cutting-edge technologies into our global operations. I'd be happy to explore that, I replied. After the acquisition closes, you'll want to contact Microsoft's partnerships division. He handed me the card, then looked pointedly at Dad. Robert, I'll expect a full report on this at our next board meeting. Let's make sure Meridian is prepared for the quantum age. As he walked off, the silence around my family returned. The reception swirled around us, but we stood in a bubble of quiet disbelief. Marcus broke it. Alexandra, why didn't you tell us? I looked at him gently. Would you have believed me? Or would you have said I was showing off, like that Christmas when I tried to explain quantum entanglement and Dad told me to stop pretending I was smarter than everyone? Victoria's legal mind was still spinning. The tax implications. You have legal counsel, right? I actually smiled. 3 firms, patent law, corporate governance, international licensing, I'm covered. Mom tried again, but family should help family. No, I said, family should support family, there's a difference. You wanted to help me fix what you saw as wrong, what I needed was support for what I believed was right. Dad finally stepped forward. Alexandra. I made mistakes, we all did, can we start over? I met his eyes, and saw something new, regret, maybe even respect. I didn't shut you out, Dad, I just needed you to believe in me when there was nothing to prove yet. He swallowed hard, the apartment, the car. You let us think you were barely scraping by. I held his gaze. I let you show me who you were, before the headlines. If your pride in me only comes after the billions, what does that say about what really matters to you? The truth hung there, undeniable. Victoria looked away. Marcus was still stunned. So what happens now? She asked quietly. I glanced toward the main floor, where Emma was laughing as the photographer lined up the cake-cutting shot. Now, I said, we celebrate Emma, this is her day. I turned back. Tomorrow, I finalize the acquisition timeline at Microsoft. Next week, I'm speaking at MIT on quantum error correction, and next month, I testify before Congress on the national security risks of unregulated quantum tech. I looked around the circle. You're welcome to be part of that world, but only if you can accept that success doesn't have to look like yours. Dr. Hartley's groundbreaking work was conducted in near total secrecy, Jonathan read aloud, eyes fixed on his phone. She preferred to let her research speak for itself rather than seek publicity. Despite numerous offers from major corporations, she founded her own company, maintaining full control over her innovations and their applications. He glanced up at Dad, brows raised in disbelief. Robert, your daughter is one of the most influential scientists of her generation. The technology she's developed could help combat climate change, revolutionize medicine, and reshape global communications. He paused, then delivered the blow. And you introduced her as your disappointing daughter? The words lingered like smoke in the air. Around us, wedding guests had begun to take notice. Across the room, Emma, glowing in her wedding gown, watched the unfolding scene with wide-eyed curiosity. Dad opened his mouth, faltered, then tried again. We didn't know. Because you never asked, I said quietly. 8 years ago, I chose a path you didn't understand, and instead of being curious, you labeled me a failure. You never once stopped to consider that I might be building something bigger than any of you could imagine. Marcus's hand trembled as he set down his champagne glass. The Mackenzie job, he murmured. You turned it down, to work on this? I turned it down to chase a vision, a future that needed space to think freely, fail often, and build without being smothered by expectations. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. The acquisition, $2.8 billion, what's your stake? I allowed a faint smile. I retained 73% ownership. My portion is valued at approximately $2.04 billion. The number detonated in their minds. Christina staggered slightly. Marcus gripped the nearest chair for balance. $2 billion? Dad whispered. You're worth $2 billion? On paper, yes, I said, but that was never the goal. I didn't do this for wealth, I did it to solve real problems, to push the boundaries of what's possible. Jonathan turned to Dad, voice firm. Robert, I have to ask, how does it feel to know that your so-called disappointment is now one of the youngest billionaires in the country? It wasn't a question, it was an indictment. I saw it hit him, not just the shock, but the consequences. His boss had just watched him belittle the most valuable person in the room. I'm proud, Dad said finally, though his voice betrayed the hollowness. Are you? I asked, calm but direct. Because just this afternoon, you told Aunt Margaret you wished I'd at least married someone successful, since clearly, I couldn't support myself. Dad flinched. Victoria turned pale. Marcus still looked like I'd spoken in Martian. Alexandra, Mom interjected gently, slipping into her usual social tone, we've always been proud, we just didn't understand. No, I said, you didn't try to understand, you dismissed my work at every turn. Every family gathering became a lecture on how I was wasting my life. Jonathan was still watching, fascinated. Dr. Hartley, if I may, what comes next? The Forbes article hinted at future plans with Microsoft. I nodded. I'll be leading their new quantum research division, focusing on applications for cybersecurity, medicine, energy systems. I'm also starting a foundation to fund underrepresented scientists in advanced fields. Incredible, Jonathan said. Then, to Dad, Robert, I hope you understand what an extraordinary daughter you have. Her work will change the world. Before Dad could respond, the wedding coordinator's voice rang out, calling guests for the cake cutting. The crowd began to shift toward the main floor, but Jonathan lingered. Dr. Hartley, he said, offering his card, I'd love to discuss possible collaborations. Meridian's looking to integrate quantum technology into our global infrastructure. I'd be happy to explore that, I said, though after the acquisition closes, you'll want to coordinate with Microsoft's partnerships division. Of course, he handed me his card, then turned to Dad. Robert, I expect a full update at our next board meeting. Let's talk about how Meridian can align with this new frontier. As Jonathan walked away, my family stood frozen, surrounded by laughter and music, yet cloaked in stunned silence. It was Marcus who finally spoke. Alex, why didn't you tell us? I met his gaze. Would you have believed me? Or would you have dismissed me again, like when I tried to explain quantum entanglement at Christmas and Dad told me to stop showing off? Victoria, always tactical, jumped in. The tax implications, you have legal counsel? I almost laughed. 3 firms, patent law, corporate structure, international licensing, every angle is covered. But family should help family, Mom said weakly. Family should support family, I corrected. You tried to help me fix what you saw as broken. What I needed was belief, not intervention. Dad had been silent, but now stepped forward. Alexandra. I made mistakes, we all did, can we start over? I studied him, and for the first time in years, I saw something real, humility. I didn't need you to understand every technical detail, I said, I just needed you to trust me, to see that success doesn't always look like what you expected. The apartment, the car, you let us believe you were struggling. I let you show me who you were, before the headlines. If your pride only surfaces after the money, what does that say about what you value? The silence that followed was louder than the string quartet. Mom looked stricken, Marcus still hadn't blinked, Victoria was lost in thought. So, what happens now? She asked quietly. Now, I said, glancing toward Emma, we watch the bride cut her cake, we celebrate her moment. I turned back to them. Tomorrow, I finalize the acquisition timeline at Microsoft. Next week, I'm giving a keynote at MIT, and next month, I'll be testifying before Congress about the national security risks of unregulated quantum computing. I paused, looking each of them in the eye. You're welcome to be part of that future, but only if you can respect that my version of success doesn't need to look like yours.